Good evening, and welcome to another exciting edition of Billy Reads Books. I'm your host, Billy. Tonight, we'll be reading one of my favorite books of all time. It's called Wisdom of the Ages, 60 Days to Enlightenment by Wayne W. Dyer. Wayne W. Dyer. And, I was first attracted to this book because of my pen name is W.D. Steves. I was saying if you're using that for when I'm reading, when I'm writing. And in any case, as always, we turn to an interesting chapter. Yeah. Let's see here. This one is called Fear and Risk Taking. Now, in Wisdom of the Ages, Wayne takes writers throughout history, and he basically takes passages that they were passages from great writers' works, and then writes a short essay explaining different themes that the great writer from history was writing about. And I've made I put a lot of bookmarks in here, and different, just to say, because I like to open up to random pages. Anyway, this one is called Fear and Risk Taking. It begins, I envy not in any moods. I envy not in any moods the captive void of noble rage, the linnet born within the cage, that never knew the summer woods. I envy not the beast that takes his license in the field of time, unfettered by the sense of crime, to whom a conscience never wakes, nor what may count itself as blessed, the heart that never plighted troth, but stagnates in the weeds of sloth, nor any want-begotten rest. I hold it true that whatever befall, I feel it when I sorrow most. 'Tis better to have loved and lost than never to have loved at all. Alfred, Lord Tennyson, 1809 to 1892. An English poet who was appointed Poet Laureate in 1850, Alfred, Lord Tennyson, is considered highly representative of the Victorian age in England. Alfred Tennyson was the chief representative of what is known as the age of Victorian poetry, yet no poet that I have ever read about could be called less Victorian. He was hopelessly addicted to tobacco and port. He was a wanderer, and he remained largely unsettled throughout his life. The poet Thomas Carlyle described him in a letter to Ralph Waldo Emerson as a man sultry and sad, in an element of gloom, one of the finest looking men in the world. His voice is mightily loose, fit for loud laughter and piercing wail. From all that I have read of Alfred Tennyson, he was a deeply passionate man who loved to take risks and was willing to take the consequences when his investments or his pursuits did not turn out as planned. In this selection, the poet sends us a message that is all too often ignored by those who live in fear of failing. He tells us to go on in life as if failure were not a consideration, and ignore our fears as we proceed. He does not envy the songbird who remains safely ensconced in a cage. Freedom is what he values, despite the inherent risks. He does not envy those who, fearing the risks of partnership in marriage, choose the safety of non commitment. The last 4 lines of this poem are among the most memorable and oft quoted in all of literature, yet they also perhaps yes yet they are also perhaps the most unheeded. I hold it true, whatever befall, I feel it when I sorrow most. 'Tis better to have loved and lost than never to have loved at all. I second this notion, and remind you that Tennyson is not just writing about love relationships. He could just as easily have written, "'Tis better to have acted and fallen than never to have acted at all." I suggest you consider a radical idea. There is no such thing as failure. Failing is a judgment that we humans place on a given action. Rather than judgment, substitute this attitude: you cannot fail, you can only produce results. Then the most important question to ask yourself is, what do you do with the results you produce? Suppose, for example, that you want to learn to hit a baseball or bake a cake. You step up to the plate and you dribble the ball of your bat after several misses. In the case of your baking, your cake comes out of the oven and collapses in a pile of crumbs before your eyes. In truth, you have not failed. You have acted and you have produced a result. Now, what do you do with the results you produce? Do you label yourself a failure? Announce that you are uncoordinated and untalented in the kitchen, and mope about your genetic deficiencies? Or do you step back up to the plate, or head back into the kitchen, and learn the results that you have produced? This is what Tennyson is asking you to do. This is what Tennyson is asking you to understand and apply in your life, in all areas of pursuits. In relationships, you have not failed if you have been through breakups or divorce court. You have produced a result. It is better to jump in and experience life than to stand on the sidelines fearing that something might go wrong. Consider for a moment what your very nature is like. As an infant, before you ever had any opportunity to be subjected to the conditioning that leads you away from risks or for fear of failing, your nature was programmed to learn how to walk. For a while, you just lie down. Then your nature said, "Sit," and you did. Then your nature commanded, "Crawl," and you obeyed. Eventually, your nature said, "Stand up on 2 feet, balance yourself, and move from an upright position," and you listened. The first time you made the effort, you fell down and returned to crawling. But your nature wouldn't let you stay satisfied with crawling, and you ignored your fears, and the result you had produced and stood up again. This time to a wobble, and then another fall. Eventually, your nature won out, and you walked upright. Imagine if you had succeeded in overcoming your natural programming. You would have, you would still be crawling on all fours and not knowing the advantages of an upright life. And so it is with everything in your life. It is far better to have acted and produced results that you will grow from than to ignore your nature and live in fear. The word fear can be thought of as an acronym that translates to false evidence appearing real. False evidence appearing real. In other words, we look at what we imagine to be a strong reason for inaction, and then we allow it to become our reality, even before we make an attempt. Our fear is supported by an illusion that an illusion that it is possible to fail, and that failure means we are worthless. Another acronym for fear is forget everything and run. This is the flight mentality in the face of the prospect of failing. This is not what Tennyson is promoting. Alfred Tennyson was elevated to the peerage 8 years before his death, and he became the national poet of England in his later years. But the younger Alfred Tennyson was a man who pursued his interests with vigor, was willing to make mistakes, and was most anxious to love. Even knowing that losing was a probability, he preferred that to never having loved. He did indeed experience rejection and sorrow, but as he says so poignantly, I envy not in any moods. Know in your heart that you have never failed at anything, and you never will. The artificial judgments of failure only keep you from erring or making a mistake. Yet those mistakes and errors are the very stuff of growth. I've always enjoyed Thomas Edison's response to a reader who asked him how it felt to have failed 25,000 times in his efforts to invent a battery. Failed, replied Edison. I haven't failed. Today, I know 25,000 ways not to make a battery. Put the lessons of Tennyson's classic poem to work in your life with the following suggestions. Refuse to ever use the term failure again about yourself or anyone else. Remind yourself that when things didn't go as planned, you didn't fail. You only produced a result. Then ask yourself this powerfully life-enhancing question. What am I going to do with all the results I've produced? And proceed to act in such a way as to be grateful rather than resentful for those less than glorious results. When others use the term failure about you, gently correct them by saying, I have not failed. Today I know another way not to bake a cake. Deliberately pursue activities in which you have previously shown little or no aptitude. The way out of fear or failure is to face it and laugh at the results rather than be embarrassed or intimidated by earlier outcomes. As you can see, it is a wonderful book full of fascinating takes from epic poets throughout time. I want to thank you for joining me on another exciting edition of Billy Reads Books, and I hope to see you again really soon. Catch you on the flip flop. See you next week.